say Band-Aid and you don't mean a particular company, then it's no longer helping to protect you by meaning that you understand when someone says Band-Aid, they're saying a particular set of things about the quality of that product. Nor does it help that company because establish brand identity because it's no longer distinctive or whatever. And so you will sometimes hear or read or see contexts in which a company will aggressively enforce their trademark. Like somebody is like, here's a logo that's super similar to ours, or a name for a thing that's really similar to ours. And somebody will like really aggressively go after them. And it can be easy sometimes to be like, oh, that's that company being a jerk. Like, why are they going after this like 16-year-old who is like selling this product out of like their parents' basement? And the answer is often because if they don't, the court will take away the trademark because they will understand that as the company retreating from the idea that it's its own distinctive, unique thing in the market. So they kind of have to. Does that make sense to people? Yeah. I think one other, I sort of said this passing a minute ago, but a thing I want to kind of underscore here also and leave you with is this operates differently at a different stage than this other things in the sense that this is entirely about distinctiveness in the market, right? So where those others are about protecting the initial idea or like thing being produced, this is very much about once it's sort of like out there in the market, how effectively is it being able to be like differentiated from other stuff? And one way I hadn't thought about this previously that DJ flagged a minute ago that I thought made a lot of sense / was smart is, especially as patents begin to expire on a thing, for instance, in some ways that makes some of these other kinds of protections even more important if you're going to continue to ensure that, again, consumers are like know when they're buying a good that it's high quality and like companies want to be able to continue to make money. Because if you're the only person selling a thing, then it's really easy. Like you'll still have trademark stuff, but it like maybe matters less for the way that the market of it all works out. But like, let's say I patent a particular drug, and like Advil is a great example of this, which is an example you gave earlier. Like Advil is ibuprofen, and like Tylenol is acetaminophen. You can buy at the store the like brand name version of this or the generic version of this. The generic version of this typically much cheaper. In theory, they are the same. There may be some reasons why people still buy the name brand. Some of that might be brand identification / recognition, and or like the market, and all the marketing and stuff that's funneled into that. It's like somebody's like, hey, go to the store, get me Advil. You can like grab that off the shelf instead of needing to do the other step of like, oh, that's the same as acetaminophen, I'm going to buy that thing. So that's good for the company because they no longer have an exclusive patent, so they need another way to differentiate themselves. But there are also circumstances in which, even if in theory a given thing is identical, maybe it isn't. You have a long-running history of that particular brand. You're like, this always has X identifiable effect on me, or works for me, or whatever, and I know that there is like no risk of there being contamination in the manufacturing process or something. So I'm going to opt into paying a premium for that brand that I recognize. And so part of the idea of trademark too is that as sort of corollary of the ways in which our economy is definitely fundamentally very pro-capitalist and pro-free market, there's an idea embedded here of like consumer choice and the idea that you ought to be able to opt into, like self-select into protecting yourself in those ways, if that makes sense. Questions about any of that? Okay, cool. So that concludes, actually, one last thing. I won't spend very long on this. We'll cover this, I think, more as part of like counterclaim stuff. So she'll talk about this in labs. It comes up in the context of particular apps or whatever. But really briefly to kind of like, as a nice bookend to all of this, it's helpful to think about, so we've talked a lot about the objectives that patent law, or that IP law in general seeks to serve. And I think it's helpful to spend some time thinking about what would other ways of achieving those objectives look like, either in addition to or as a replacement for the IP regimes that we kind of talked about here. So for instance, if our goal is to like maximize innovation, and we accept the premise that large returns on innovation are necessary in order for people to do that, one way of guaranteeing those kinds of returns on innovation is stuff like, we're going to give you a patent, like a limited grant of exclusive monopoly, so that you'll be able to generate a bunch of money from consumers. But another way might be if you develop a new technology that meets X, Y, and Z requirements, we'll pay you $500 million, like as the government or whatever, right? Like these are not the only options. And in practice, we end up using different combinations of these options depending on what the circumstance requires, right? So the COVID example earlier was a great example of this, where we sort of went more of the latter route than the former. That I won't get into that in too much detail. Trade secret